In tonight's Political Insider, a big win on energy for the Obama administration. Today, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. The agency requires electric market operators to compensate customers who reduce the amount of energy they use during peak hours. Joining me with the latest is Robert Barnes, Supreme Court reporter at The Washington Post. Robert, before we get into the nitty-gritty here, let's talk about the timing of this ruling. Metro D.C. is digging its way out of an historic blizzard. Is this an effort at irony from the nation's highest court?
No, I don't think so. I think the court says that it likes to just churn out its opinions when it gets them done, and this is a case that was argued in October. You know, the Supreme Court was one of the few groups in official Washington that was operating today, albeit with a pretty empty courtroom.
All right, give us some background on FERC versus the Electric Power Supply Association. Who argued what?
Well, the administration says that these plans, as you mentioned, that allow large consumers such as factories, big box companies, schools, to be paid for lowering their electricity usage at peak times is a great savings for everyone, but not for the power companies that supply the electricity. They've been losing profits under this plan, and they said that FERC went too far, that it didn't have the power to impose this kind of demand response plan that it had instituted.
Now, you write the court ruled 6-2 that FERC was within its powers. Explain the implications here. How will this ruling impact the electricity market?
Well, they say that it will allow for more innovation, for more ways to try to bring down electrical usage, and that will mean less pollution as power companies don't have to produce as much. And so they say that it's a way, the administration and environmental groups say that it already has been an effective way to, for instance, prevent brownouts and blackouts in the summer during times of peak electrical usage.
You're also following a case called Montgomery versus Louisiana. It involves mandatory life imprisonment terms for juveniles who've been convicted of murder. Bring us up to date here.
Well, the court continues to say that juveniles are different from others. A few years ago, it decided that juveniles could not be executed for the crimes they commit. Later, it decided that states could not impose mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for juveniles. And this decision is sort of the third one in that. And it says that you have to give a juvenile a chance to get out of jail. In other words, that its decision in the past was retroactive, and now it has to go back and look at those juvenile offenders who were sentenced to life in prison without parole and figure out if some of them can get out of jail.
It's an interesting dilemma. Justice Antonin Scalia descended in dramatic fashion. He invoked the Godfather movies. Tell us more about that.
Well, he says that the court had made states an offer they couldn't refuse. It says instead of going back and resentencing all of those juveniles, and no one's quite sure how many there might be, but probably more than 1,000, it says instead of doing a resentencing, it could simply grant them a parole hearing. And Scalia says, well, then mission is accomplished for those who want to get rid of mandatory life in prison without parole.
Robert, before you go, what's coming down the pipe? What's next from the Supreme Court?
Well, you know, the court has already heard important cases about affirmative action, and now coming up for the first time in several years, it's going to be looking at abortion restrictions, which has been something that a number of states have imposed in recent years. That's probably going to be one of the big cases of the term.
Well, it's going to be an interesting year. Do you think any of these things are going to have some major political implications on the presidential race?
Well, you know, you've got all of these decisions, President Obama's immigration policy, this abortion decision, the contraceptive mandate, and the Affordable Care Act. All of those will come down likely in June, just before the political parties pick their presidential nominees.
It's going to be a major time. Thanks for being with us today, Robert Barnes, Supreme Court reporter at The Washington Post. Thanks again.
My pleasure.